What we would do is we would pull the shoulder blades back, kind of draw the trap back, get on right at the junction of the neck and shoulder and push down, and I'm on a flat surface, and that is that first rib. All right, very good. Now here's what we need to know. If they're equal from side to side and relatively non-tender, okay, there's no problem with them. When the rib is elevated, and it'll be elevated from 1/4 to 1/3 of an inch, you've got what's called an elevated rib, and you need to put it back down, and it's usually just being caused by too much tone in the scalenes. And it's very simple to put back down, all right? If it's higher, more like 1/2 inch, between 1/3 and 1/2 inch, it's very likely that you have what's called a subluxed first rib. And what happens on a subluxed first rib, the rib actually gets yanked up so high that it sits on the transverse process of the T1 vertebrae. They're very painful. They cause a lot of spasm in the operculum, and because that rib is now sitting high, the brachial plexus has to actually drape across it along with the blood vessels. So you can start to get a lot of thoracic outlet, a lot of tingling. It may be misdiagnosed as a carpal tunnel. It may be misdiagnosed as a cubital tunnel on the elbow, and it's all because that brachial nerve is having to take a detour, and as it does, it's resting right on that first rib. You'll see more in the ulnar distribution with that, just so you know. But if it's up high enough, I mean, it can really wreak havoc in there. So you treat that a little differently. If it's greater than 1/2 inch, you probably have an anatomical cervical rib. And of course, that has to be confirmed with an x-ray. Let's say we found that she has just an elevated rib. First rib is elevated. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to find the rib, all right? And then what I'm going to do is put my foot up on the table and place her armpit right over my leg and get her right up like that, all right? Sometimes, if you need to, you can have the person actually put their feet up on the table so you're sitting side saddle. So let's have you sit side saddle that way. No, that way. There you go, perfect, good stuff, good, great. I know not everybody can sit in this position. What I'm gonna do is get on that first rib with my thumb, glide her this way by moving my knee. Here, glide her this way. That gave me a side bending barrier, I back off. I'm gonna rotate her up, there's my rotational barrier, okay? And a little bit of extension, there's my extension barrier. And all I do is say push right here with a pound, that's all. As she does, I just put downward pressure on that rib. Now she can breathe in and out, and I can follow her breath cycle, which is good. She's putting a pound of pressure right here the whole time, right on my hand, just like that. And all it takes is 4 or 5 good breath cycles. You push down, you try not to let the rib come up. You won't stop it completely, but you can assist it going down. You do that 4 or 5 times, and when you're all done, you slightly sit the patient up. You can put your legs forward for me. And then what I do is I still keep a hold on there and I stretch, gently stretch, stretch, stretch. And I say to the patient, if I'm bothering you at all, you let me know. And almost always they say, that feels so good to do that. Because I'm actually, oh, she said, that's actually holding I'm holding that rib down and now stretching, 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 stretching those muscles. I can rotate a little bit and then I get it back up. And then what I'll do is I'll come back up and say, okay, how does that feel now? So shoulders back, I pull the traps out of the way, I get right on there, and yes, they're nice and symmetrical, and it should be much less tender. There will be some little bit of tenderness because you kind of just mash down on it, but that's okay. They'll be fine with that. They'll immediately say, wow, that does feel a lot better. Well, that's for an elevated rib. What if we got a sublux? What if I'm feeling that thing and I go, whoa, that is at least 1/3 to 1/2 up there. That might be subluxed. Put them in the same position. There you go, right up there, feet up on the table just like that. Again, if your patient can't get into this position, just leave the feet down, it's fine. I get right on that flat aircraft carrier we call a first rib. I glide her to the side. I put her in a little rotation, each time hitting my barrier. So there's my barrier and I back off. There's my rotation barrier and I back off. There's a little extension barrier and I back off. And go ahead and have her push. Now this time I'm gonna push forward first, because I've got to get that rib off of the transverse process. So I'm going to drive that rib in the direction of my index finger anteriorly. And just like moving a boat through mud, that's what it feels like when you move these ribs, like a boat through mud. Very little. And I do that first 4 or 5 times, and if I was right, what'll happen is all of a sudden that rib will feel like it just fell off a cliff, and it'll start going downward, and down she goes, just like that. And then you hold it another 4 or 5 breath cycles, and you're good to go. So again, you push forward first, like moving a boat through mud. You go over the cliff and down. Each of them about 4 to 5 breath cycles is all it'll take. And remember, if it doesn't budge at all, no matter what you do, and she's still pushing here, if it doesn't budge at all, you probably have a cervical rib. All right, I have her legs straighten out for me, just like before, and I come over here and I gently go ahead and I just stretch that rib, now holding it in place. Just gentle stretch side to side, never wanting to hurt the patient, okay? And back up you go. And that would be the treatment in sitting for the first rib. Now I'm going to show you a treatment in supine for the first rib. It's not as effective, but some people like to use it and it works. It's virtually identical to the other treatment, except if you've noticed, I've got the patient up on a pillow. I need to get a little bit of extension just like I did when I had them sitting, and I wouldn't be able to do that without that pillow under the shoulders. And basically it goes just the same. If you're doing just a treatment for an elevated first rib, you pull the trap out of the way right at the junction of the neck and the shoulder, and you come down right onto that first rib, and again, it'll feel like an aircraft carrier because it's nice and broad. Okay? It's like landing on something very flat as opposed to round like another rib would be. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into a little bit of extension and back off. A barrier and back off, a little rotation barrier and back off, and a little bit of side bend barrier and back off. Just make sure you cover all those barriers. And then what I'm going to have the person do is rotate away from me. Rotate side bend with 1 pound of pressure, no more. As she does, I push down on that rib. Sometimes the rib will move beautifully when they're supine, and it won't do it when they're seated because the muscles just have a little bit more tone. Same thing, she breathes in, I don't let it move. She exhales, I follow it down. She breathes in, I don't let it move. She exhales, I follow it down. I'll do that for 4 or 5 breath cycles, and the whole time she is contracting her muscles to rotate her neck to the left. The modification for that would be if I had a subluxed first rib. So first I'd have to come behind the rib. So I'd actually have to get up on it and sink behind it. And now I'm going to push forward on that rib. All right, I'm going to push it to the front of the body. So I'm going to lift, it would be a lift up from here. So I'm going to lift it, push it anteriorly. I push her into her, there's our barrier there, there's our barrier there, there's our barrier there. And we're all set. We did our barriers and we backed off just like we've always done. And now I'm going to have her push and to rotate her head to the opposite side, to the left. And as she does that, I push toward the ceiling with my thumb for 4 or 5 breaths. And I will actually feel this rib kind of jump off the edge of a cliff, and after about 5, and it'll head down, and now I change my force now down toward her feet inferiorly and hold it for another 4 or 5 breath cycles, limiting as much of that upward rib motion as possible and encouraging as much of that rib to go down. All right, and I'll do that for 4 or 5, good, and then we're all set, and I'll bring her back to neutral, and I'll go ahead and poke on that rib. And what I like to do is just then look for symmetry above and behind and make sure that they're fine. It should be much less tender, but there may be just a little bit of tenderness because you had to push down on it. And that is the treatment, the supine treatment for the elevated and or subluxed first rib.